It has been 5 years since LMPD officers shot and killed Breonna Taylor during a raid at her home, sparking a national movement for police reform.
WDRB's Raina Katko shows us the tribute to Taylor this afternoon and how some of the community say her memory lives on.
What they heard was not a knock. It's not a shout or a warning. It's the crushing blow of a battering ram, a sickening, thunderous force that rips through the silence of a Louisville apartment in the middle of the night. It's a force that says, "Get out of my way." And the people on the other side of that door have no idea what's happening. No idea who's trying to get in. Inside, Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, are doing what any of us would be doing at 1 o'clock in the morning. They're in bed. But the sleep is gone, replaced by a cold, immediate fear that shoots straight to the heart. They're calling out, shouting into the darkness, "Who is it? Who is there?" But all they get back is silence and the continuous, violent force of a battering ram. Kenneth, a man with the legal right to defend his home, grabs his gun. He thinks they are being robbed, that criminals are smashing through their front door. He has no reason to think otherwise. And in the terrifying chaos, he fires a single shot, a warning shot toward the door. Just a single shot. A moment later, over 20 shots come screaming back in. Now, before we get to the tragic climax of the story, I have to ask you something. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt completely unsafe in your own home? Let us know in the comments below. Because this is not a story about a violent confrontation between a criminal and the police. This is a story about a nightmare scenario. A story about a perfectly normal night, a perfectly normal couple, and a single flawed piece of paper that turned their home into a war zone. This is a story that begins not with a crime, but with a mistake. A deadly mistake. And to understand how it all went so wrong, you have to understand the life that was interrupted. The life of Breonna Taylor. She was 26 years old, a first responder, an EMT on the front lines of a global pandemic. She dedicated her life to helping people, to saving people. Not just as a job, but as a calling. You'd think that's a pretty good track record for the universe. You'd think that would earn you some good karma points. Turns out it doesn't. Turns out your resume means absolutely nothing when a piece of paper and a couple of guys with a battering ram come knocking on your door at 1 in the morning. Breonna was in the process of building the life she had always wanted. She had plans to become a neonatal nurse, dreams of helping the most vulnerable. She had a loving relationship with Kenneth, a guy who worked hard and loved her for the smart, compassionate person she was. Their home on Springfield Drive was their sanctuary, not a drug den or a hideout. But the Louisville Metro Police Department had another idea. Their investigation was into 2 men, and they had a theory that those men were using Breonna's address to receive packages. It was a flimsy theory, one based on a single, unverified tip. A tip that was so bad, it would later be revealed to be entirely false. No drugs, no packages, nothing, but a hunch. You know, the kind of hunch that gets you a no-knock warrant. And this is where the joke really writes itself. A no-knock warrant. It's an official piece of paper that gives the police permission to skip the polite part of a home invasion. It's an official document that says, don't bother announcing yourselves. Don't worry about who's inside. Just bust in and hope for the best. It's a legal way to say, let's just kick in a door and see what happens. And on this night, what happened was a tragedy that would shock the world. The contrast here is sickeningly perfect. On one side, you had a woman with her whole life ahead of her. A woman who dedicated her days to saving lives. On the other side, you had a few cops with a battering ram and a bad piece of information. Breonna Taylor wasn't a criminal. She was a consequence. A consequence of a system that put a hunch over a life. On that night, in a quiet Louisville apartment, 2 people were about to have their lives irrevocably changed by a simple mistake. But it wasn't their mistake. They were just the victims of a bad joke with a lethal punchline. And in the final moments of her life, Breonna Taylor was about to find out exactly how deadly that joke could be. Let's talk about how the police got a piece of paper that gave them permission to kick in a woman's door in the middle of the night. You've got a guy named Jamarcus Glover. He's a drug suspect. The cops want him, and they've got an idea. They think he's using the U.S. Postal Service to get drugs. Now, if you're a cop and you're after a suspected drug dealer, you're looking for a pattern. You're looking for where the drugs are going. And they had a theory that Glover was sending packages to a few different addresses, one of them being Breonna Taylor's apartment. Now, on a search warrant affidavit, a detective named Joshua Jaynes swore that he had confirmed with a U.S. postal inspector that Breonna's apartment was receiving packages for Glover. It was the crucial piece of evidence, the single thread that connected a woman who saved lives to a guy who sold drugs. There was just one small problem. It was a complete and total fabrication. The postal inspector later said he never confirmed that. He only told the police that some of Glover's mail had been sent to a different address. Breonna's address had never received any packages from him. The entire premise of this deadly home invasion was based on a lie. They got their warrant based on a hunch dressed up as a fact. A lie that would soon be the death of an innocent person. But they didn't just get a normal warrant. Oh no, they got a no-knock warrant. This piece of paper is a magical document that allows police to skip a whole lot of things. It lets you burst into a home without saying who you are, without giving the people inside a single second to react. It's supposed to be used in high-risk scenarios where you think the suspect will destroy evidence or open fire on you the second you knock. But the suspects in this case, Jamarcus Glover and Adrian Walker, were already in police custody. They were arrested hours before the raid on Breonna's apartment. So the entire justification for the no-knock warrant was completely gone. The suspects were in jail, but the warrant was still on the books. It's like getting a speeding ticket for a car you sold 5 months ago. The logic just isn't there, but the consequences are. And yet, the raid proceeded as planned. In the early morning hours, 3 plainclothes officers, Detective Brett Hankison, Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly, and Detective Miles Cosgrove, arrived at Breonna Taylor's home. They were not in uniform. They were not in marked police cars. And according to testimony from Kenneth Walker and numerous neighbors, they did not announce themselves as police. Instead, they took a battering ram to the door and began to force their way in. This was no accident. It was a premeditated act, a direct result of a flawed investigation, a reckless warrant, and a shocking disregard for the safety of the innocent people inside. The officers had an option to get a knock-and-announce warrant. They had the option to wait until the morning. They could have simply not gone. But they chose to proceed with the most aggressive option available. And the tragic reality is that the web of deception woven by the police led them to the wrong person at the wrong time with the wrong warrant. And the first cost was about to be paid in an unimaginable way. The stage was set not for a heroic drug bust, but for a terrible act of violence against a woman whose only crime was being home. A terrible act that was made possible by a terrible lie. At approximately 12:40 a.m. on March 13, 2020, the silent, unsuspecting world inside Breonna Taylor's apartment was shattered. The officers were outside, plainclothes, without warning. The first thud of the battering ram against her front door wasn't just a sound, it was an earthquake in their peaceful home. Imagine being ripped from a deep sleep, plunged into absolute terror. Your sanctuary is under attack. Breonna and Kenneth were disoriented, frantic. They weren't criminals expecting a raid. They were a couple jolted awake by what sounded like a violent home invasion. They called out, "Who is it?" No answer. Just the relentless, splintering assault on their door. Again, they shouted, panic tightening their throats, "Who's there?" Still, a chilling silence from the other side, punctuated only by the escalating destruction of their property. In those critical seconds, they weren't facing law enforcement. They were facing an unknown, violent threat. Every second that passed without a clear announcement from the officers cemented their belief that their lives were in danger. Kenneth Walker, a responsible, law-abiding citizen, was also a licensed firearm owner. He retrieved his handgun, not to attack but to defend. His girlfriend, his home, his life. With the door now compromised, splintering inwards, he saw a shadowy figure. In pure self-preservation, in an act he would later describe as terrifying desperation, Kenneth fired a single warning shot. He didn't aim to kill. He aimed to scare, to deter. That single shot, intended as a last-ditch effort to ward off what he believed were violent intruders, struck Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly in the leg. And with that, the already volatile situation detonated. The return fire was immediate, overwhelming, and utterly indiscriminate. Over 20 rounds, in a chaotic, deafening barrage, ripped through the apartment. It was a blind barrage, a hail of bullets tearing through walls, furniture, and ultimately flesh. Detective Hankison, one of the 3 officers, moved to the side of the apartment and fired 10 shots through a covered glass door and window. 10 shots into an area he couldn't see, through material that offered no line of sight. It was a reckless, unforgivable act that later became a cornerstone of federal charges against him, displaying an extreme indifference to human life. It's like firing a shotgun into a dense fog and hoping you only hit the bad guy. Except in this scenario, there wasn't even a bad guy. Just sleeping residents. In the midst of this terrifying onslaught, Breonna Taylor was struck. Not once, but 8 times. 8 bullets ripped through her body as she stood in her own hallway. The chaos was instantaneous, lethal. Kenneth Walker, miraculously unharmed by the storm of bullets, was left to witness the horrific reality of what had just happened. The firing stopped. The immediate aftermath was a gruesome tableau of shattered glass, splintered wood, and the chilling silence that follows extreme violence. Kenneth, shell-shocked and terrified, made a desperate 911 call. "Somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend," he screamed, his voice raw with disbelief and terror. "I don't know what's happening." But as help arrived, a different kind of horror unfolded. Paramedics immediately rushed to Sergeant Mattingly, who had been shot. He received swift and professional medical attention. Breonna Taylor, however, lay dying in her hallway. For several agonizing minutes, she gasped for air, coughing, struggling. She was bleeding out, slowly, desperately, while the focus of every responder was elsewhere. No immediate medical aid was given to her. Before the paramedics could truly acknowledge her catastrophic injuries, it was already too late. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Her life, extinguished not by a criminal, but by a system that came for the wrong house, with the wrong information and the wrong tactics. A brutal, senseless end to a life dedicated to saving others. What do you think really happened in those critical minutes after the shooting? Could more have been done to save Breonna? Let us know your thoughts below. The silence that followed the gunfire was not the end. It was the beginning of an entirely new kind of war. In her own hallway, Breonna Taylor was gone. And in the vacuum of that devastating moment, in the absence of body camera footage and clear answers, a fire began to burn. In the eyes of the police, this was a cleared scene, a case closed. But to her family and to the nation, it was an injustice that demanded to be seen. Breonna Taylor's name, for too long just another victim in an all-too-familiar cycle, became a rallying cry. The hashtag say her name wasn't just a trend, it was a demand. A demand to acknowledge that black women are disproportionately affected by police violence and are often invisible in the larger conversation. The Black Lives Matter movement, already a powerful force, seized upon her story, elevating it to the forefront of a national reckoning. Protests swept across cities, not just in Louisville, but from New York to Los Angeles. People marched, chanted, and put her face on signs, demanding answers, demanding accountability, demanding a justice that felt agonizingly slow in coming. The sheer audacity of a botched raid, a warrant built on lies, ending in the death of an innocent essential worker, was simply too much for the nation to swallow. The legal aftermath was as complex and frustrating as the raid itself. Kenneth Walker, the man who had fired a single shot in self-defense, was initially charged with attempted murder of a police officer and assault. Think about that for a second. You're legally defending your home from what you believe are intruders, your girlfriend is dead, and suddenly you're the criminal. Thankfully, those charges were eventually dropped at a small victory in a landscape of overwhelming grief. But when it came to the officers who pulled the triggers, the path to accountability was a winding, treacherous road. The state grand jury, after hearing the evidence, decided not to indict Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly or Detective Miles Cosgrove for Breonna's death. Their reasoning? They were justified in returning fire after Kenneth Walker shot at them. It was a legal loophole, a grim twist of logic that enraged millions. However, Detective Brett Hankison, the officer who fired 10 shots blindly through a covered window and door, facing no clear target, was indicted by the state grand jury. Not for Breonna's death, but for wanton endangerment of her neighbors in the adjacent apartment. Because apparently, bullets flying through a random wall are more dangerous to unseen neighbors than to the woman directly in their path. A darkly ironic outcome that highlighted the painful deficiencies of the state justice system. Hankison was later acquitted of those state charges. The fight, however, didn't end there. The federal government stepped in. In November 2024, after a federal trial, Brett Hankison was finally convicted. The charge? Depriving Breonna Taylor of her civil rights through excessive force. His reckless, blind firing was deemed an unconstitutional act. In July 2025, Hankison was sentenced to 33 months in prison, plus supervised release. A moment of accountability, small as it might have felt to many, but a powerful statement nonetheless. Even police officers are not above the law. Other officers involved in the falsified warrant faced federal charges related to conspiracy and making false statements, highlighting a deeper rot within the police department's processes. Beyond the criminal courts, there was a civil battle. Breonna's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Louisville. In September 2020, the city agreed to a $12 million settlement with Breonna's family. It was one of the largest settlements ever paid in a police misconduct case involving a black woman, a testament to the immense injustice suffered. But the settlement wasn't just about money. It also included significant police reforms. The city passed Breonna's law, which banned no-knock warrants, a crucial, tangible change that aims to prevent similar tragedies. New policies also mandated that officers wear body cameras when serving warrants and activate the minutes before and after entry, a transparent move that could have dramatically altered the understanding of that fateful night.
Got some breaking news coming into our newsroom right now. The former Kentucky police officer convicted of violating a civil rights offense in relation to the death of Breonna Taylor has been sentenced to 33 months in prison. 3 years of supervised release is set to follow that sentence. Brent Hankinson fired 10 rounds through Taylor's apartment but did not hit anyone. Taylor was killed by another officer during that raid. The Department of Justice is asking for Hankinson to receive 1 day of imprisonment. Protesters were arrested outside the courthouse where the sentencing took place, including Breonna Taylor's aunt.
And even though it's not what we wanted, we thought that he should have gotten more time. We are grateful to Kristen Clark, Merrick Garland, and the Department of Justice who had the courage for the first time in the history to bring federal charges against a police officer for killing a black woman in America. And so we are grateful that he is at least going to prison.
I think the judge did the best she could with what she had to work with. There was no prosecution in there for us. There was no prosecution in there for Breonna.
So, what are the takeaways from Breonna Taylor's tragic story? First, the danger of no-knock warrants is undeniable. They escalate risk, create confusion, and turn routine entries into potential death traps. Rigorous, honest warrant verification is not just good police work, it's a matter of life and death. Lies on affidavits have lethal consequences. Second, transparency and accountability in police investigations are paramount. When police police themselves, trust erodes. Independent oversight, civilian review boards, and honest reporting are not luxuries, they are necessities. The shifting narratives, the lack of body cam footage, the inconsistent witness statements, all contributed to a painful lack of clarity and prolonged the agony of seeking justice. When all is said and done, when the lawsuits are settled, the laws are changed, and the protests have faded, what remains is the truth of life. And that life was Breonna Taylor. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. A woman who loved to laugh and who worked tirelessly to help people, even in the middle of a pandemic that terrified the world. Her dreams of becoming a neonatal nurse weren't just career goals, they were a reflection of her deeply compassionate soul. She was a healer, taken by an act of violence. Her life of promise was extinguished by a system that failed her on every level. A system that allowed a flawed warrant to be executed in the middle of the night, a system that allowed officers to fire blindly into a home, and a system that initially chose to protect itself over a victim's life. But in her death, Breonna Taylor became more than a victim. She became a catalyst. Her name, once whispered in the quiet grief of her family, became a thunderous rallying cry for justice. Her story exposed the fatal flaws in police protocol and the deep-seated racial biases that plague law enforcement. It pushed cities to ban no-knock warrants and forced the nation to confront the fact that an innocent black woman could be killed in her own home without consequence. Her death led to Breonna's law, a civil settlement, and the conviction of at least one of the officers involved in the raid on federal charges. These are tangible, monumental changes, but they are a small comfort against the brutal fact that a promising life was cut short. Breonna Taylor's story is a reminder of the urgent need for reform. It's a reminder that justice isn't always clean, and it isn't always swift, but it is always worth fighting for. The final, powerful takeaway from this case isn't just about police reform or flawed warrants. It's about remembering that at the heart of every story is a person, a human being with a life and a name that deserves to be honored. Breonna Taylor's name continues to inspire activists, lawyers, and citizens across the country to demand a better, more equitable world. If you found this video insightful and believe in the power of accountability, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Crime Scene Exposed to help us continue shining a light on these important stories. Thank you for watching.